He said, you were just dressed up beautifully. You had a beautiful suit on and everything. And when we were sitting down at the table and we were going through your books and everything, I kept looking at your glasses. And he said, they were clean, but around the rim, they had tiny little paint drops all over them. So, and he said, this girl's got to be for real. Because they kept asking me in the books, now, you just directed this, right? Somebody else did this artwork. I said, no, this is my stuff, both theater and theme park. I said, here's a list of people that you can call. And so they offered me a job right then and there.
That is Karen Connolly Armitage, who's here to talk about her 26 years at Walt Disney Imagineering and so much more. You're listening to the Tomorrow Society podcast. Hey there, thanks for joining me here on episode 162 of the Tomorrow Society podcast. I am your host, Dan Heaton. Hope you're all doing great out there. I know it's an interesting time right now in the world, but I hope this gives you a little bit of time to think about something else. And I am really excited about this week's show. It was awesome to talk with Karen Connolly Armitage, who worked at Walt Disney Imagineering for 26 years, like I mentioned, but just has so much more to her story. Starting out doing designs for theater, she was also an actress at that time, ultimately started working at Larkins Associates in St. Louis, which is where I am right now. While she was there, she worked on theme parks, 2 of them for Anheuser-Busch in Williamsburg and in Tampa. Did a lot of work for them, and then ultimately ended up joining Disney sort of by chance, but in the best way possible, and did so many cool things. Joined in the 1970s as they were getting ready to ramp up for EPCOT, and then designed the interior theaters for Impressions to France and for the American Adventure, worked on Main Street at Hong Kong Disneyland, was very closely involved in the development of the Disney MGM Studios, and then worked on the layout for the Great Movie Ride and specifically the gangster scene. It was really fun to hear about that. Plus Frontierland at Disneyland Paris, my favorite Frontierland of any of the ones I've been to, which is saying a lot. We talk about that. So much more. And beyond the specific attractions, I just think that Karen has a really interesting story and how she got to where she was and was able to do so many amazing things at Disney. And the timing of this episode is perfect, actually, because the book, Women of Walt Disney Imagineering, is set to come out in a little over a week on March 15th. And that is a book that we talk about on this episode near the end, but 12 women who reflect on their careers in theme parks, including Peggy Ferris, who was a guest on this show. Others like Kathy Rogers, Katie Olson, Tori Atenzio McCulloch, Becky Bishop, Julie Svensson, so many more. It was the brainchild of Ellie Erlandson, who we also hear about on this show. I cannot wait to read this book and to learn so much more about some Imagineers that I know a little about, others that I know almost nothing about. And just hearing Karen's story really makes me think that we're in store for a real treat with all of these stories in this book. So based on what I know, I would highly recommend you check it out, and I plan to do so as soon as it comes out next week. So let's get right to it. Here is Karen Connolly Armitage. First of all, I'd love to know, before you even started working on theme parks or Disney or anything, like, how did you get interested just in in art and design. Like, what really drew you to that when you were growing up and getting into a career?
Well, I had a very unusual upbringing. I was raised in two private boys' schools where my dad was director of athletics, and he also taught American and world history. And the first one was Howe Military School in Howe, Indiana, which closed a couple of years ago. And it was Howe is in northern Indiana. And I remember little snippets of that. I mean, I was there from birth to maybe 7 or 8. But one thing that I do remember, well, two things I remember. My mom, who was a stay-at-home mom at that particular time, even though she was a Wellesley graduate, dabbled in watercolors. And by the time I was a toddler, I didn't get finger paints, but I got my own watercolor set. And there was just big reams of paper around that my dad got from the school. And so when my mother was painting, she put me in a wetsuit practically and sit me on the floor and just, dabble in it. And she loved the watercolors because everything was washable. You could wash it all out. So that's a very strong memory I have. The other strong memory I have is I remember a sandbox, and I remember these guys. I mean, they were men to me. I was 3, but they were students. They were cadets. And I was told when I was older that they built me a sandbox. And I was the only little girl on the whole campus. And this is a military school. These are all baby boys, from ages like 7 to 18 away from home. So most of them had little sisters. And so I was very popular because it reminded, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I can remember a couple of these guys. I can't remember their names, whatever, but I remember sitting in the sandbox, and they would be sitting in there with me with a bucket of water and stuff like that. And they bought me little trucks and stuff like that. And we built a town. I mean,
wow.
It was something. I had no experience of going to the beach in the summer and building castles. That came later when we moved back to Massachusetts. So that was my, in the late spring and early fall, because talk about snow, that northern Indiana, So that's one of my very, very first memories. And eventually we moved to Connecticut, southern Connecticut. My parents were originally from the Boston area, and we moved to Cheshire Academy in Cheshire, Connecticut, and lived in a dorm. There were 21 boys in this big dorm that we lived in. And my dad was director of athletics, and he had many of the guys on his teams were in the dorm. Because I remember on the other side of my wall lived a guy by the name of George Vegas, and he used to help me with my math homework all the time. So this was a time, let me see, I was born in 47. So yeah, a little bit, before that, the Mickey Mouse Club appeared. Right. The original Mickey Mouse Club appeared. And I'll tell you very honestly, I found it very entertaining and engaging, but not the stuff about Disneyland. I was drawn to Spin and Marty, Corky and White Shadow, and I was starting to get really horse crazy because that was the time of Fury and My Friend Flicka and everything. And back in Indiana, since Howe Military culture right there, I went back in Howe, I went to a 2-room schoolhouse. It was called Lima School with Amish kids. And they all got to ride their ponies and their horses to school. And I cannot tell you how jealous I was.
Yeah.
That kind of continued in Connecticut. And then we got transferred to the Ainsley House, which was a much smaller, it was an old Victorian home. It's not there anymore. I checked on Google Maps, but it was built in the late 1890s or something like that. So it was an original home. And so I was getting older and older, and I had 2 little sisters by that time. And my dad started asking around. And by the time I was 9, he'd set me up with a job literally
Wow.
in South Meriden, Connecticut, cleaning stalls for a private show barn. And he thought, we'll do this maybe for a week, and then that'll be the end of it. She won't be bugging us anymore. And the following Saturday, there I was next to his bed. Daddy, come on, wake up. You have to drive me to the barn. And that lasted from the time I was 9 to the time I was 15. And I got to show some of these other people's horses. I was New England 5-gaited champion in 1961, juvenile champion. I mean, and since my dad was into sports, he'd always send a reporter from the Boston Globe to these horse shows. And there I'd be in the sports section of the Boston Globe a little bit, you know. So the reason why I mentioned this is that there was a lot of, because by the time I was 12, I was the manager of that barn, getting them ready to go to shows and stuff like that. So I became very clear thinking under pressure. These were expensive horses. And because they were horses, you had to know what you were doing. And that at such an early age, without my knowing it, put such a foundation of going and doing things and using my head and not being afraid. You understand what I'm saying? As a little girl.
Yeah. As a 12-year-old, that's really early to have that kind of responsibility.
Absolutely. Now, there were adults around, all around and everything, but I learned how to, you know, take care of tendons and you know, just all colic and just all kinds of stuff. And I had no problems shoveling manure. I still do it every morning to this day. But anyway, you know, no problem with hard physical work at all. So, and my parents were thrilled that I wasn't around the boys growing up. My dad was especially thrilled. It started, you know, I was 15. I was like a sophomore in high school, and school was getting harder. I always had really, really good grades. I had to. My parents were teachers. My mom ran the library at Cheshire Academy then. And I was a junior, and I hadn't been in any cliques or anything else like that. But a couple of things happened with the horse barn, and I knew I just couldn't do that anymore. So I just told my parents I wasn't going to go back. It wasn't a healthy place for me anymore. And so I'm looking around for something to do. And I'm a junior, right? And I start seeing these notices about, we need some help designing the junior prom. Okay, I'll help. So I ended up designing and painting. Well, I ended up art directing, actually, when you look back to it. But I ended up painting a mural for one end of the barn, end of the gymnasium, and it was 30 feet high. And how big is a basketball court? I mean, you know, it was the width of the gymnasium with the bleachers pushed back up to the wall. Okay, so it was probably 45, 50 feet long, something like that.
At least, yeah.
And my dad got me this seamless paper, heavy, it was almost canvas. And so I did this little rough. The theme was Blue Hawaii. Elvis had come out with the movie South Pacific. You know, this is back in the early 60s, you know. So I did the sketch and took it to my art teacher, and she kind of went, well, that's ambitious. And my parents had a house on the Cape at that time, but I didn't have any friends there. So I stayed home by myself, and up in the attic, I could roll out. I had the 30 feet tall, but I could only roll out about 20 feet. I had just gridded it off. My mom showed me how to grid it off and everything. She said, you can just blow it up like this. My dad got me all the paint from Cheshire Academy. And so I painted this huge thing. And then the football team arrived at my house with a pickup and a really long flatbed, rolled the sucker up and everything, drove it to the high school, and all the guys in shop and everything, they all got together and figured out how to hang it. Wow. I didn't think anything of it. I just thought, God, okay. So that was one thing. See, I was working on being an art director from the time I was born.
Yeah, totally. From like 3 years old. Yeah.
Yeah. So the next year, and you'll probably laugh at this, the next year, well, I always sang to the horses. I loved music. My dad took me to the Schubert Theater for the pre-Broadway run of My Fair Lady with an unknown by the name of Julie Andrews. And I was like, for the whole thing, I was just like mesmerized. Then the movie South Pacific came out, and my parents took all of us to see that. And again, I was just mesmerized. And my parents got me a little, they were called record players then, a little turntable that did 45s, right?
I know what a record player is.
Yeah, and a 78. Even my sisters to this day tease me about it because I had it going all the time and I'd sing along and da-da-da-da-da-da. So my senior year, it comes out that the senior play is going to be a musical called South Pacific. And I went, so I was still pretty shy by this particular time, but I walked in to the band room where all the auditions were going on. And there was a guy sitting there, at the piano. And he says, took one look at me and he said, so you want to try out for Nellie Forbush? I said, no. I said, I want to be Bloody Mary. Now, this is long before there was any notice of, there were no Tahitians in Cheshire. You couldn't cast it appropriately. And here I am, fair-skinned, Irish with big blue eyes. I want to play Bloody Mary. And he said, why? And I said, because I love her songs. Those are the songs I want to sing. And he said, you can sing. And I start, most people live on a lonely island. And he went, holy crow. So I got cast as Bloody Mary, had the time of my life. And I now had switched from being addicted to horses to being addicted to musical comedy. And also I helped paint the scenery and whatever. And by the time I got to UMass, I joined the Operetta Guild and just did musical after musical. I usually could get cast, either in the lead female or the supporting female role. And there were directors, you'll see where this is going. There were directors from New York City there and talked to myself and another gal that we did a lot of shows together, along with a couple of guys. And only one guy did musicals. There was a guy by the name of Steven Schnetzer who ended up on Another World, the soap opera, for 13 years. And then there was this other guy. He didn't do musicals, but you may have heard of him. I did a couple of shows with him. And his name was Richard Gere.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I think I've heard of him.
Okay. Yeah, there were lots of people at UMass. Lots and lots of people at UMass. I did summer stock. These directors said, come down to New York, audition, and you can do summer stock. So I got cast, and it was an incredibly exciting experience. I ended up at the Surflight Summer Theater for one summer, and it was a new musical every single solitary week. So you were cast if you were on stage in a lead, the next musical coming up, you were usually in the chorus. So you were rehearsing, you were learning lines and music and dance and everything. But in the afternoon, you were in rehearsals for something else. You were doing 3 shows at one time. And it was a pretty intense summer, a lot of catfighting in the acting group. It was just ridiculous. That part I hated. And it was a non-equity group. Actually, some of them were equity. I wasn't at that time. But I found out, well, I saw that they were having trouble getting their scenery painted. And I said, when I have time, let me just come fix that for you. So I became their secret weapon. I was patching and, doing all kinds of stuff when I had time. And I would rather do that than go to the beach and lay in the sun because I'm so fair, I just fry. So I kind of, while I was doing that, was doing this shift. Plus, they were the only straight guys in the whole company. Not that I just didn't love all these other guys, but I was raised in a boys' prep school. You know what I mean? And I swung a hammer and on and on and on. So I would go back to UMass for the regular school year and everything. And from that experience, I just walked into the scene shop and said to Nick Bryson, who ran the scene shop and was a professor there. He had just got his MFA from the University of Wisconsin. He said, "Who are you?" And I said, "I come to volunteer to paint scenery." He said, "Terrific. Can you paint?" I said, "Yeah. If you tell me what you want, I think I can figure it out." So I started doing that and I got better and better. And there was really nobody there was one guy who was really, really good. One professor was really good and he taught me a couple of tricks and stuff like that. And I just loved being in the scene shop. I was a liberal arts major because initially I thought I wanted to go into the Peace Corps. I'm of that generation.
Right.
And I was taking French and Spanish. I had started picking up extra stuff with art classes. And I really hated the drawing and painting classes, but I loved the sculpture class. And so this is what happened simultaneously. I was going to school. I had really close friends from the Operetta Guild, and a dear friend of mine, Corinne Trabucco, whom I still chat with once every 3 or 4 months. And she was a theater major. And she said to me, I'm going to take over Royster Doisters. And Royster Doisters was a student-run theater organization at the University of Massachusetts, one of the oldest ones in the entire United States. It had originally started in the early 1800s. And I said, "Are you asking me for help?" She says, "Yeah." And I said, "Okay." And things went along. And I was in sculpture class. The professor said, "All right, you're going to have to do something really big for your final project." I'm eating pizza with Corinne that night and everything. And she says, "We've got to find a set designer." I said, "I'll do it." She said, "Really?" I says, "Yeah, I'll do it." And she said, "Well, okay." She didn't say, "Can you?" It was a pretty famous play at that particular time. Do you know what that is? That's the story of Thomas Cromwell and butting against Henry VIII. He wanted Cromwell to sanction his marriage to Anne Boleyn. Mm-hmm. And Cromwell was a devout Catholic. And this was when the Church of England started to get set up because Henry, it's all political. And the show ends with him getting beheaded. So I did this very Shakespearean set and everything, and walked into the scene shop and saw Nick Bryson, and I wasn't a theater student. And I told him what I'd volunteered to do, and could he coach me through it, the construction and everything. He was so delighted that, he says, "My God," and everything. So I had a lot of his guys on and some grad students helping me do this thing and everything. I cannot begin to tell you what I felt like on opening night, because I had more elation, different kind of elation than I ever got from performing on stage, even though I was pretty good. But this was it was different because I wasn't building somebody else's set. It was something that I worked out with the director and everything else like that, and the lighting designer. And it was a very masculine looking set. I mean, it was wood and timber, and we could dress it up to make it look like, but it was very Gothic in feeling. I couldn't use a lot of real wood paneling. So I had to paint it, faux paint paneling that sort of made it look like an interior of a room and stuff like that. had the time of my life. Had the time of my life. Now, did I realize I was a set designer yet? No. But it was about 2 months after that Nick Bryson and a woman by the name of Liz Weiss, who was the costume design teacher, and she ran the costume shop. And they took me out to lunch. The two of them, they had been partners. They had been students at the University of Wisconsin at the MFA theater program there. And they took me to lunch to tell me all about that and to tell me that that's where I needed to go to graduate school. And I said, what? And they both looked at me and said, don't you know you can make a living as a scenic designer? And I went, really? People make a living doing this? And they said, yes, you have to. We've decided you have to, after you graduate as a senior, you've got to come back here and do 1 year of graduate studies in theater because you have no theater credits whatsoever. And we can't send you to John Ezell without any theater credits. And I said, who's John Ezell? And he was the big guru, scenic designer, at the University of Wisconsin. And so I got there to the University of Wisconsin, and it was a 3-year program. And I think it was it was Thanksgiving of the second year I was there. John Ezell called myself and a gal by the name of Judy Jurasek, who eventually ran the scenic shop at the Met and is great art director in New York, doing a lot of TV and film and stuff like that. John called both Judy and I into his office and said, there is a fellow I went to school with at Yale. He lives in St. Louis, and he's doing the Nutcracker for the Milwaukee Ballet. And we are going to loan him our scene shop over Thanksgiving to get his scenery painted, especially his backdrops. He can't pay much, but he's looking for a couple of good scenic artists. And I volunteered both of you. Karen, I know you're not going home to Boston for Thanksgiving. And he looked at Judy and he said, I know you probably were going to take Karen to your parents' house up in Oshkosh for Thanksgiving, but can I convince you to stay here for Thanksgiving and paint this stuff for him? And that's how I met Grady Larkins.
Yes. So from there, Larkins Associates, St. Louis, which obviously very personal to me, but how did you end up, what was the process where you ended up working actually for Larkins and working on Busch Gardens parks and working an entirely related but different field?
Judy and I painted this for him, and we had a great time with him. We discovered he wasn't that much older than us, Judy did go up and visit her parents, so I just sort of finished up everything. He asked me to do, it was some paperwork so that he could get the stuff shipped. And he told me what it was and showed it to me and said, can you do this for me? Because I need to go to Milwaukee, and I need somebody to make sure that everything gets shipped. And I said, yeah, sure. No problem. I'm here. I'm not doing anything else, And I did make one trip to Milwaukee. And then he came back to Madison for a bit. And I can't remember where this happened, but he had a set of brand new scenic brushes. He gave one set to Judy and one set to me. It was like $500 of scenic brushes, I was shocked and everything. And he said to me, do you ever get to St. Louis? And I said, well, no. He said, do you know, and I cannot remember the guy's name. Do you know so-and-so and so-and-so? And I knew him vaguely. And he said, well, he comes down all the time. He said, if you're ever looking for something to do over the weekend, he said, I just got a beginning contract for the new Busch Gardens in Williamsburg, Virginia. And he said, I need help first naming all of these shops. And he said, I would love if you, and even Judy, if she wants to come down. He said, we've got a big house. We'll put you up. He was married. He had 2 little kids. He says, we'll put you up and everything, and you can help us out. He had an ulterior motive. I didn't know that yet.
Right.
Okay. So, gosh, spring break went down and I got more and more involved in the old country and more about it and everything. And I mean, I was working through my thesis and I just was like, oh, God. He called me on the phone and he said, if you want to come actually work instead of going to another university and teach, give me a call. And so I did. I didn't have any attachments. He offered me a job and I didn't even go to my graduation. I went there and he is the one that really taught me how to draft. And he sent me to the cabinetry place that was making all the cabinetry for all the shops in New Hampshire. So I learned how retail cabinetry at that particular time was built. But he was also the resident scenic designer, professor, and actual scenic designer at what was the Loretta Hilton Repertory in Webster Groves, which eventually came St. Louis Repertory, right?
Right. It's very close to my house. Yeah.
Yeah. He also was doing the Muni Opera every summer. So he was slowly building a company that could handle all of that. And I did paint at the Muni every once in a while. And I actually designed a couple of shows at the Loretta Hilton. He had two other painters that really helped him out at the Muni. And I started to get all the theme park stuff. Got to be very well acquainted with the Anheuser-Busch team that was shepherding that and everything. And he just dumped more and more responsibility on me. And I was the one that he would send to Tampa when we were changing that from just a beer garden into a theme park. And there were loads of low concrete walls. And so, we figured out a story and I did a ton of research on African cultures and stuff like that. And because I was not the married one, I was the one on the plane.
Right.
Now, I was doing all of this. I had never seen a Disney theme park.
Wow. Had you been to any really parks, even
not one
type parks?
Not one. No, I take that back because Grady also did the Six Flags parks. He would do the shows, okay? And it would be my responsibility and another person's responsibility. We worked as a team to take his initial design and then make sure it fit. Well, he would design it for Mid-America, which is there in the St. Louis area.
Right.
I don't know if it's still there. Is it still there?
Still there. Yeah. It's a different name, but now it's Six Flags St. Louis. Still there.
Yeah. And all of that scenery was built at Dallas Stage Scenery down in Dallas, Texas. Mm-hmm. And so there was Six Flags over Mid-America, Six Flags over Texas, and Six Flags over Georgia.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So it was one show and they did the same show, but all their theaters were different. So this other guy and I, we would design, he'd just give us sketches and we would design the scenery for Mid-America and then translate it to Dallas and Atlanta and then just make sure it got shipped in and whatever. So, I mean, I didn't actually ever get to enjoy the theme park because I was working my butt off all the time. I was getting pretty burned out. I mean, when I've had a couple of conversations with people where they started asking me about this, and I've looked back and I knew deep down that I couldn't keep up that pace forever. I just knew it. And I was exhausted, but I didn't know it because I was still, by this time I was in I was 27, 28. I had no social life whatsoever. I'm looking in the mirror saying, hey girl, wake up. Yes, this is exciting and everything, but come on. Not that I didn't love the job and everything that I did, but I'm starting to think long term for myself and what is it that I really want and don't run yourself into the ground and the whole 9 yards. So, and I did have one incident. I used to do a flight from St. Louis to Dallas, Texas, and Grady had a scenic shop there in Webster Groves. And he would take in shows from the Houston Opera, and we'd paint them on the floor. You know, I would fill in when I wasn't busy doing something else. So there was a lot of stuff going all the time. And sometimes I'd be the one sent to Houston to watch the inn come in and make sure everything was there and the whole 9 yards. And then I would fly to Tampa on that, you know, that park down there. And sometimes that was a 4-week thing because I was supposed to paint walls or see more graphics go up or something like that. And one time Grady was doing a theater show at the arena stage in Washington, D.C., and he wanted me to check in with him there. So, and then he sent me to Williamsburg, and then I had to go to New York to, you know, and wow. On one of those trips, I woke up and I didn't know where I was. And I got scared. I really got scared. I didn't know what town I was in. I didn't know what day it was. So I called back at the office hoping to find Grady, and his secretary picked it up and everything. She said, "What's wrong?" And I just burst into tears. I said, please tell me where I am and what I'm supposed to do next. And she said, okay. She said, I'm going to call, you are in Washington, D.C. That's what she told me. She said, Grady's no longer there. You were supposed to, she says, never mind. I'm going to call Delta or United, whatever. Pack your bags. You get on a plane. I'm going to get you direct. I'm going to fly you first class right back here. I was having a meltdown. I was so tired, you know, and that was really kind of a wake up call for me. And so I started thinking about leaving. And so I sat down with Grady and I told him, and he said, in all honesty, I've seen this coming. And he said, the contacts I have are in the theater world, and here are 2 for New York. I said, okay, thanks. He said, why don't you go with us to the IAAPA convention? It was one of the first IAAPA conventions, and it was in New Orleans. He said, stay in the French Quarter. He said, I'm going to have you and Dick Godwin paint scenery. We have a booth and everything. And he said, you know, you'll have a good time. And I said, oh, okay. All right. I'm not paying for it, you know. And he says, bring your paint clothes. And so I did. I had Oshkosh, you know, that were just covered, and they had a lot of pockets and everything. I had really long hair at that time. And so when I was painting, I would braid it up and everything. And I'd either braid it down the back and stick it in the back of because otherwise it would get in the paint. So one day at this huge convention, theme park convention, I'm painting away with Dick Godwin. We had little postcards and we're doing 8x12, and we're both going on the same piece at the same time. And I hear these guys standing behind me just making funny comments. I mean, they were amused at what we're doing and everything and kind of whatever. And I turned around and there's 4 guys, and 2 of them are in suits, and 2 of them are in suits with ties, and the other 2 were in like just jackets and, you know, whatever, all dressed pretty nicely. And so I turned around and started talking to them and everything. And we were laughing and joking and the whole 9 yards. And they said, what's your name? And I said, I'm Karen Connolly. They said, how long have you been doing this? And blah, 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 blah. And he said, we're from Walt Disney World, the entertainment division of Walt Disney World. It was Tom Craven, who was head of like all the parades and the shows and stuff like that. John Haupt, who was the lighting designer, and this other guy, Michael, God, I don't even remember his last name, But he's the one that figured out how to build the Main Street Electrical Parade for Bob Yanni. So they took me out to dinner that night and offered me a job at Walt Disney World.
Wow.
Right there on the spot. I mean, Tom Craven said, he says, we so need you in Florida. He said, but I have to tell you, Karen, you really belong in Glendale. I said, what's Glendale? And he said, have you ever heard of WED Enterprises? I said, no, never. I didn't know. So he explained it to me. And he said, I have a dear friend there. His name is Eric Weston, and he is running the interiors division at WED Enterprises right now, and they're starting to staff up for EPCOT Center. Long story short, after this thing at IAAPA, which was in November, Grady took me back to Tampa, and I thought I had something to do, but no, he actually took me to Walt Disney World for the first time ever. I'd worked all of that time and never been to a Disney park. And I can remember he had a friend there, and we walked in like on the east side behind the Opera House, at Town Square.
Yeah.
And I mean, I had no idea where I was and everything. And I'm looking at the train station and stuff like this. Now, I'm in Florida, right? And I'm going, holy crow. It's so different from the Busch parks. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I'm just turning around and everything. And I remember Grady took my shoulders and he pointed me straight up Main Street. I'm going to get real weepy. I saw that castle and just collapsed.
Oh my.
I just lost it. It was so beautiful. Look at me. I'm an old woman now. Anyway, that first moment, I thought, wow. So, and Grady laughed and laughed and laughed. He said, I thought you'd like that. No kidding. So along came December. I was starting to get interest from New York City, especially from Doug Schmidt, who was the overall art director at Lincoln Center.
Oh, wow.
No kidding. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And Grady had designed a boat ride for the Tampa park. And so Anheuser-Busch was going to send me to Nairobi, Kenya, to the buyers they had over there for the Tampa park, for their retail shops. They had cities and towns over there that did incredibly beautiful, cultural stuff, yeah. Props and dressings and stuff like that. So they were going to send me to Africa. And I thought, okay. And then the green monkey disease broke out in Nairobi. And what they eventually figured out, they shut down Kenya completely and most of Africa because it was spreading like wildfire. What that was the beginning of HIV/AIDS. And I don't know why they called it that, but that's what they did. So Bush said, because of their retail connections, there's an LA gift show, Los Angeles gift show. And the people that supply the wild animal park in San Diego with all of their retail and their props and dressings and everything else, they're going to be there. We want you to hook up with this guy. Okay. So I flew to LA like right after New Year's. I still had the card from Tom Craven with Eric Weston's name on it. And I thought, I'll just give it a shot. What's to lose?
Yeah.
And so I did. And I had to meet this props guy down near San Diego, drive down to San Diego. And I can't tell you how much I loved being in January in Glendale, California, where it was, I left what you're living with right now. And there, it's 78 degrees. It's, I was just in seventh heaven. I had Eric Weston's internal work phone number, and I called him and he answered the phone. And I introduced myself. I told him Tom Craven da 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 da. I told him why I was there and everything. And I said, I have brought my theater portfolio and my theme park book, and I would just love an opportunity to show them to you. And he goes, well, sure. Great. How do I get to where you are? So the next morning, I met him at 10 o'clock in the lobby there. And he always used to tease me because he said, you were just dressed up beautifully. You had a beautiful suit on and everything. And when we were sitting down at the table and we were going through your books and everything, I kept looking at your glasses. And he said, they were clean, but around the rim, they had tiny little paint drops all over them. So, and he said, this girl's got to be for real. Because they kept asking me in the books, now, you just directed this, right? Somebody else did this artwork. I said, no, this is my stuff, both theater and theme park. I said, here's a list of people that you can call. And so they offered me a job right then and there. And right while I was there, how soon can you start? And I was doing a play, the front page that was the name of the play at the Loretta Hilton. And opening night was like March 15th. This is in January. I said, I've got a show, And they said, okay, we will move you. Your first day will be April 4th. How's that? I said, fine. And that's how I got to WED.
Wow. And you mentioned, you get there and Epcot's full speed ahead.
Not yet.
Not yet. Still
Not
ramping
1977. Up. They were just starting to build up for it. There were only 350 people there when I arrived.
So what were some of the early things you did at that point, kind of before Epcot really took off?
I got assigned to do to do a lot of what they used to call them lessees, participants. It's the corporate sponsorship that you see in the park, Coca-Cola, Pepsi-Cola, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. So one of the first assignments I had was the American Egg Board wanted presence on Main Street. And so they put them in the former home of Hill's Brother Coffee Shop, it was like if you walk into the park, the Opera House is on the right-hand side, and then there's the corner building that's opposite the Emporium on the other side of the street. Okay, you following where I am?
I think so.
Right next to that was a Hills Brothers venue. Okay, pretty little Victorian thing, and they'd let guests into Town Square, but the rope drop was right there at the Emporium in that corner building. But people would go into this coffee shop for pastries and coffee and stuff like that. That's what it was. Well, the American Egg Board wanted this place, and they were going to do omelets, and so they wanted a demo kitchen, right out front and everything. And that was something new that hadn't been done on Main Street before. So that was one of my first assignments. And then there was stuff with Sunkist. They wanted to upgrade their little shops both in Adventureland and Main Street and everything. But that's when I met Dorothea Redmond. And she is the incredible watercolorist who, did New Orleans Square, but her beginning claim to fame, I don't know if you know this or not, she was the first woman continuity artist ever hired in Hollywood.
Wow. No, I did not know that.
Do you know what a continuity artist is?
I believe so, but please, yeah.
It's all right. This is what I understand it to be.
Yeah,
okay?
Go for it.
A script gets written. The director is starting to envision how he's going to do this, and he's working with the producers and the script writers to kind of weave the story together. And they would hire continuity artists to set up the main point. And they'd say, all right, this is this kind of entrance with a staircase, and the draperies are kind of like this, it's set in this period, and da-da-da-da-da. And the continuity artist would get just rough pieces of the script. And it's like reading a script and doing the set, only you just do an illustration. She was hired by David Selznick for Gone with the Wind.
Oh, wow.
Okay. And she was on it for the whole thing. And her illustrations from that film are just breathtaking, just breathtaking. And she was a teacher at, what was that school? Chenard. That was the big art school that they all taught at in downtown LA. Man, she really did teach me a lot about watercolor and taught me some really good shortcuts and stuff like that. And she was a great she was a grande dame. I mean, she was elegant and I mean, old Hollywood, just, right there, and funny, just really, really funny. But she said, no, don't get involved with this drafting and stuff like that. Let the boys do that. Don't go to the job site. You don't want to get dirty. And I'm thinking, well, there we're a little different. But yeah, she, and then finally I was just, as EPCOT was building, they were asking me to they were looking for artwork to pitch to various lessees in World Showcase. So do me a stuffed animal shop. Steiff is the really high-end stuffed animals, Do me a shop that sells Hummel figures for the German pavilion. Do me a wine shop for France, blah, blah, blah. And so you would just pick a corner, and they were real fast. And they had a bunch of artists doing that far better than I could. But they sort of kind of handed this whole lessee thing that was still going on simultaneously at Disneyland and Walt Disney World to just, it was like the Marty Sklar's and the John Henches said, okay, she'll take care of us. She'll keep us appraised. I was working with the guys at the studio that was doing all the contracts and working with the estimators and stuff like that. And then, the people at the parks and everything. And so that was very similar to my experience with Anheuser-Busch. And then EPCOT started taking off. And because I had a theater background, I got pulled into, and I met Rick Rothschild real early. We became good buddies and everything. He was always saying, no, I don't want to, have Karen do your curtains. She's the only one that knows what the stuff is.
Wow.
So I just wove in and out of it, stuff like that,
Right.
But yeah, that's how I got to California.
So EPCOT, I know you did so much.
No more than anybody else. There were so many brilliant people there.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't do any more than anybody else. I mean, it was a huge undertaking. Probably the biggest construction going on in the United States at that time, if not the world, literally. And everybody was up to their earlobes, I actually left the project really early because my father died. And I had finished the American Adventure of what I was supposed to do for that. And actually on the American Adventure, all I did was the actual theater interior, and then figured out with Rick how he wanted the main drape to work. And that was true. In fact, I was working on the France Pavilion. I was down there working on the France Pavilion when my new husband at the time called me and said that my sister had called and said that our dad had died in Washington, D.C., and she was putting him on a train to go back to Boston. And the company was very different then.
Yeah.
They flew me first class to Boston and was going to put me up in a hotel, which I refused because I had so many relatives there. And they were going to rent me a car, which I also refused because I was shocked that they, did that for me. They packed up all my stuff in Florida and shipped it back to Glendale. And I just picked up, one suitcase and they had an employee for life. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. What was the atmosphere like at WED when you joined? I mean, obviously you mentioned very different in a lot of ways, but for you going in there, what was like, because there was a lot of old school people and then a lot of young people coming in. What was that like?
It was fun. The heart of it was the model shop. There were young people there, as well as people from the very beginning of Disneyland. Harriet Burns had a cubicle in the model shop. Fred Yerger, a guy by the name of Jack Burgess, this huge, wonderful teddy bear, huge man who could do the most intricate, tiny little thing. Kimmy Toombs was in the model shop. Kim is, I don't know what her last name is now, but
Irvine. Yeah.
Is she still going with Irvine?
I think so. At least that's what I hear. Yeah.
Okay. Because I remember when she married George. Maggie was sitting right next to her. It was Maggie Irvine, and she married Jimmy Elliott.
Right.
And they became sisters-in-law and everything. They had cubicles in there. God, Scott Hennessy, the Kirk brothers were in there for a while. I mean, it was just, especially during the building of EPCOT, because that 1/8-inch model got built right in the middle of it. Oh, there were all kinds of great things that happened. I don't know if anybody ever told you this story, but there was a decision made by, I have no idea who made the decision, but they were looking for efficiency in the model shop and the way it was laid out. Could we make the whole work product happen faster if we arrange some things differently? Well, all the kids in the model shop, and most of them were adults anyway, there were cameras set up so that they would track what their patterning was and stuff like that. And back then, you were encouraged to walk around and chit chat with everybody, because that's where, right. You might be talking about your Saturday night date, but you were also talking about, hey, look, I just figured this out, and that's how the stuff happened. There was always cross-pollination was always encouraged. And so everybody in the model shop knew that all these cameras weren't on them and everything. And so they figured out exactly where the cameras were pointing. If you look at the tape from the cameras, you see this big model and you see people walking around, and very slowly over the course of a couple of days, an entire pyramid is being built by plastic cups just being stacked.
Time lapse.
Yeah. Time lapse. I mean, it was hilarious. It was just hilarious. And people were always helping other people out. It was before anybody could sign any of their artwork.
Right.
So the whole idea is that you were involved in this secret society, making these wonderful things that'll eventually, everybody was just, you were told, you signed documents of confidentiality. You can't even go home and tell your family. You can't brag to your family. You can't, and that was long before iPhones. And, if you brought a camera into work, you'd get fired. So, yeah, it was this kind of special group that you belonged to. I'm sure you've heard that from other people.
Oh, yeah. Not about the cups, though. Nothing about the pyramid of cups. So I know that you also worked a little bit later on Disney MGM Studios, and you were part of kind of those early concepts. So I'd love to know a little bit about that experience and kind of what you did as it kind of moved forward.
Oh, dear. Me and the boys, a great group of people. As you know, you probably heard from some of the other people, it started out as a pavilion for EPCOT, an entertainment pavilion. And when Weiss and I forget who else pitched it to Frank Wells and Michael Eisner, they just looked at each other and said, this is a whole separate theme park. And so then we were off and running. And I was in show set design at that time. The company used to bounce me around from show design, show set design, and then finally they invented concept design. and put me in there. And that's where I stayed. They put me in the architecture department for a while. No,
a lot of job titles.
Yeah. I didn't care. I really, really didn't care, as long as I had interesting work to do. But anyway, I was in show set design. The team started out with Trevor Bryant, the two Kirk brothers, and myself. And I can't remember if John Cavlin was in that or not. But Eric Jacobson he was not part of the team yet. And so it was the Kirk brothers, I think, who came up with the hijackings, the whole idea of the hijackings. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And
so it was my initial job, to figure out how big do the plan, do the ride layout. And I mean, I'd been around enough of the folks that did that. I mean, once you learn sort of how it works together and stuff like that, you just got to start, and you work your way through it with the people. Oh, Michael Sprout was writing the script. You work it through with the people who, just like a film, who are doing it. You kind of feel your way through. So with the hijackings, the concept, and I went to talk to a couple of ride engineers that I knew who worked on the roller coasters, because I knew it had to be a zone ride, like a roller coaster, that this ride was not going to go uphill and down Dale.
Right.
But because in two different spots, the cars had to stop while other cars were moving along through different scenes, there had to be X number of zones so that a car couldn't enter a zone ahead of its time. Otherwise, you'd have a pileup. Well, we got that figured out and everything, and everybody was pretty happy about it. And so I think it was Bob Weiss that asked me to do the model for Gangster Street. And then the Kirk brothers were going to do the model for the Indiana Jones scene. I eventually picked up the Western hijacking scene also. So I started on the Gangster Street. I knew it had to look film noir, so I didn't want to paint it in black and white. So I used complementary colors that gray each other out so that when they lit it, it wouldn't go dead, that there would be color in the air. And it was a lot easier. It was a lot easier for the lighting designers to get it to look dramatic, because it was painted more like a theatrical set rather than just painting it black and white. And I moved down to the model shop to do that and everything. And moving right, just going right along, and started painting it. And then I think that there were 3 or 4 other people that were brought onto the team, Eric Jacobson being one, and 2 others. I'm fuzzy on who it was. And so Eric got a couple of scenes to do because he could build models. He had come from entertainment. And we were kind of moving right along and everything. And there started to be some hiccups. And we worked through that and everything. And then there came a request. I actually don't know how this happened, because the 2 guys that ran the model shop, Matt Pretty and Michael, God, I can't even remember his last name, came to me and said, we're going to take you off studio tour, and Tony Baxter needs you on Paris. Jeff Burke needs you on Frontierland. Okay. So they moved me. I spent actually the next 3 months going back and forth between the 2 teams because I had so much information. And in the very beginning, Eric and Brock Thoman, who took over the running, the development of the ride and everything, they didn't really understand why I kept saying, when they said, well, we want to do this and this scene. And I'd say, well, yeah, you can do that, but not at that speed. It has to stay in the zone. It was hard for them to understand and everything. And so there was a little friction there. And I was getting absorbed into Paris and stuff like that. And so I finally just said, guys, you'll figure it out. Go talk to the engineers, blah, 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 blah. And so I just kind of left. And I was being encouraged by management to leave the studio tour.
Right.
So that was fine. And the Paris team opened me, God, you're finally here. And I have never worked so hard in my entire life as I worked on that Paris job.
It's an amazing land, though. I mean, the results are incredible. That's such a cool frontier land.
It's probably one of the better, if not the best, frontier land, because Jeff Burks said to me, I want this to feel like a real town. So we're going to weave the story in and out, The layout got going. The architects got going on the layout. And, they put Big Thunder on the island. And, you go underneath the water. And have you been? Have you ever been there?
Yes, one time we got there. And Big Thunder and Phantom Manor and everything so well.
That's all Jeff Burke. That is all Jeff Burke. I mean, just masterful man. And we had almost a completely female team in every division. Great. Graphics, show set design, the two gals from show set, Maureen O'Sullivan and, I can say Claudette, wonderful, talented people. Leticia Olivier did all the graphics. Pat Burke, of course, went and found all the props, all the mining stuff. And he had the cubicle right behind me. And when I told him, I said, I want these shops to look like they were part of the mining operation. And now retail has come in and, so you have to teach, you have to work with me and tell me where these things could be logically. So we did all of that. And I mean, it was just fun.
There's so many other cool projects you worked on, and there's too many that we could cover, but I'm curious, is there, of the other things we haven't talked about, is there another one that's really stood out to you or was really memorable for you that from your career that was a great experience or something interesting?
Hong Kong was interesting, but it was difficult because if you talk to people who were there during the construction, it was at that particular point, the most difficult project anybody had ever worked on, and did a lot of physical damage to people because they were working so hard. It was brutal. I was up here by the time it opened. I worked a little bit more on it. I did the dollhouse on Main Street for David Bricky, but we had 25% of a normal budget to, do everything. And so we had to pull all the stops out. I mean, the main thing that I was so thrilled about it with Hong Kong was Tori McCullough's interiors department. They had all come back. They had all come back off of Tokyo Disney Seas. And that was another, like Paris. God, look what we created, that part. Breathtaking. And that was another moment in time. Because it was going back from one of my Hong Kong trips when I was talking to Kelly Ford. He was my show producer on Main Street. And he said, I'm sending you back through Tokyo. You haven't seen Tokyo Disney Seas yet. And I said, no, I haven't. And he said, I'm giving you 2 days. I said, can we afford it? He says, don't you worry about that. I'll make sure we can afford it. I'm giving you 2 days there. And so that was another one where I walked in and I turned around and I looked at that lagoon. I looked at that hotel and I went, holy crap. I did a little bit of work on that project, and I saw the stuff that I'd done, mostly in the hotel, but just knock your socks. It gave me chills, knock your socks off. But what I mostly appreciated about Hong Kong is those people came back and they were really bummed to be assigned to Hong Kong. Because it was nothing new. They couldn't And so I got my caretaker pitch together and said, yes, you've learned all this stuff. Now we're bringing Tinkerbell and the mouse to communist China. If you think about it, it's When You Wish Upon a Star, which has not been allowed in China since Mao.
Right.
You have to caretake it. So, I remember when Tori assigned the people who were going to work on Main Street, and I hauled out drawings from the original Disneyland and said, all right, I know you guys have looked at these, but maybe not in this way. See how they took this one molding and it's used in all these different shops, flipped over, put together with something else. I said, I want you guys to get together for all these shops and restaurants on Main Street. You have 5 moldings, 5. Mix and match them. Figure out what they are, and we're going to have stone baseboards and just do a little rails. You've got plate rails, you've got cornices, and da 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 da. And in some of this, and watch your scale. Make the street get lighter as it goes towards the castle. And they did wondrous things. Just wondrous things. They got so damn clever. I mean, it was just a delight to watch them literally reinvent the wheel.
Well, we could talk all day, but I want to finish with a few quick questions. I know you're featured in the upcoming book called Women of Imagineering, along with 11 other women from a similar era. I'd love to know a little bit for my listeners know a little bit about that book and just how you got involved and kind of what the concept is behind it.
It is the brainchild of Ellie Erlandson, who thought that she was going to write a book for her kids and her grandkids and all of her grandnieces and stuff like that about her life. I don't know. Have you interviewed Ellie?
I have not, but I would like to. Definitely someone I would want to.
She speaks 5 languages. She was born in Eastern Europe, but grew up in Brazil. Wow. She is an incredible woman and an incredible architect. Okay, that's what she is. She's a spectacular architect. And she was one of the first people. She was there in 1977. She was one of the first people I met. And she didn't have her architectural license yet, but anyway, she got thinking about it and started making a few notes and stuff like that. And it just occurred to her that she wanted to ask some of the women that she knew to write about this era, because it was the Mad Men era.
Yeah.
And so she's the one that said her parameters were, in order to be part of this book, and every person would get a chapter, all equal. Nobody's bigger or lesser than anybody else. You had to be retired, no longer working for the company. Mm. You had to have 25 years or more with the company. That was about it. There may have been a couple of more. So she just called me one day and asked me. And I said, God, that sounds like fun. And so the group, we all really know each other. We've known each other for a long time. The person with the most years is, of course, Peggy Ferris that you've interviewed. Yes. And Peggy also maintains that she's the oldest. She may be. I said, I'm right behind you. I am right behind you. So we would get together, every few months or so and chit chat and read the stories to each other. And I will say that it is a very diverse book, very, very diverse book. And some of it is hilarious, absolutely hilarious. Some of it is very poignant, All the chapters do illuminate some of the hurdles, some of the circumstances, some of the challenging positions we found ourselves in because of the era. But it's not in any way man-bashing, in any way, because none of us had that experience. We all grew through a time. And yeah, there were difficulties and but the whole world was learning. I ended up in a lot of situations when I thought, well, I guess I can't do it that way anymore. And I will be perfectly honest. When I initially arrived at WED, I went about doing things the way I had done with Grady and Anheuser-Busch and that theme park. What I didn't realize is I had far more experience at that particular time than most of the gentlemen I was working with. I assumed, that they knew. And so I did some missteps, and being from the East Coast, I was very blunt. And I was coached by a couple of women there. You can't talk to them like that. I said, so anyway, those things are talked about and stuff like that, but some wonderful, incredible stories. Wonderful. We had a great time putting it together, and we're thrilled that Disney Publishing grabbed onto it.
Yeah, I can't wait for it to come out. Just having talked to Peggy and now to you, that if that's any indication, that all 12 stories, I'm sure, are just going to be so interesting. So I think it's great that, because a lot of stories haven't been told before. There's still a lot of people that aren't we hear a lot. I mean, they're amazing people, but you're Tony Baxter or people like that. We haven't heard about a lot of the other people that did so many important things. Well, before we finish, I would love to know a little bit about what you're doing right now in California, because I know you're still involved in some really cool projects.
Frank and I designed this house together. I hired an architectural firm here who also had an office in Santa Barbara, because I was going back and forth to Hong Kong. This guy, a great architect, teaches at Cal Poly. And when I would come up here for meetings, they really didn't get what we were going. He had used some Cal Poly students. So I have a old California home. Skip Lang came up here when he was still alive with Janice. And he stood outside and said, "My Lord, you can take," what did he say? "You can take the girl out of Frontierland, but you can't take Frontierland out of the girl." It's a old California home. It's, rustic and big beams and stuff like that. We had a good time doing it. And people up here, we got to know some people, and they saw it and introduced us to people. And I ended up the first 6 or 7 years up here doing 2 mega mansions, multi-million-dollar homes from scratch, because it never occurred to me that I couldn't. You understand what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And one of them has been on a home tour here. I'm now, I've done a lot of remodels of, a handful of remodels down in SLO of some of the arts and crafts homes and Queen Anne, Victorian things.
Right.
And I've gotten hired by a lot of architects up here because they don't sketch and draw. They don't throw color on paper. They do it in the computer and it looks, they don't actually do painting. And a lot of them don't really draw. So there's a lot of period architecture up here, and a couple of architects have gone after that work because they know they can call me and get a drawing, get a sketch and everything. And once they have the sketch, they can have their company do it and everything. So there's that. I'm now working on a big remodel down in Pismo Beach, which is what I'm doing right now, trying to finish up the contract drawings and get samples and stuff like that.
Well, excellent. All that sounds perfect given your background. And like you said, because technology's changed, but that, a lot of younger people aren't doing it. But regardless, it's been so great to talk with you, Karen. Thanks so much for all the time. And this has been amazing here on the podcast. Well,
thank you as you can tell, you get me talking, I just won't shut up. So you have to say, stop. So I apologize for that.
Just wanted to give a big thanks to Karen. This was one of my favorite interviews that I've done so far on the show, which is saying a lot because there's been a lot of fun conversations. If you would like to check out some of these other episodes, go to tomorrowsociety.com/podcast with an S at the end, or you can find the show basically anywhere that you would listen to podcasts. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Overcast, all the big ones. We are out there, and I really appreciate the support that you give to this show. Also want to say thank you to BFish81 for giving a review on Apple Podcasts where he called the show one of the best. I don't know if that's true. There's a lot of great shows out there, but I really appreciate it. Thanks so much. And if you want to support the show, go out there, leave a review. It really helps. Or you can become a member of the Tomorrow Society through Patreon by going to patreon.com/Tomorrow Society, learning about the cool perks that really help out the show. I love doing it, and I hope that you're enjoying listening to it. The music for this show was written by Adam Hookey and performed by the Sophisticated Babies. Next time, I'm going to be talking with Josh Shipley about his awesome career at Walt Disney Imagineering. He actually started on the Great Movie Ride as a gangster, worked on Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln, Disney Kingdom series, lots of cool Marvel projects, and then moved on to Evermore Park. Really enjoyed talking to Josh. Can't wait for you to hear this show. Thanks so much for listening. I really appreciate all the support. Hope you're all doing awesome, and I will talk to you again next time.